There is a small group of people who remember calling a friend and getting a busy signal, who folded a note small enough to pass between desks without the teacher noticing, who waited all week for a show and watched it live because there was no other way. And those same people now manage Slack threads, digital calendars, unread notifications, and AI tools just to stay current at work. They did not ease into the digital world slowly. They woke up one morning and it was already there, and no one asked if they were ready. You know who you are. You were born somewhere between 1976 and 1985, too young to be fully Gen X, too old to be a real millennial, old enough to remember a world with no digital memory, young enough to have built your entire adult life inside one. And somewhere between those two worlds, something got very heavy. This is not a video about nostalgia. This is a video about what it costs to live in two eras at the same time. One way to understand it is this. You learned to live between two codes. The nervous system learning to operate under two incompatible sets of rules. Most generations adapt to one dominant era. You adapted to two. And adaptation that looks seamless from the outside is rarely painless on the inside. Here is what your childhood actually gave you. Boredom. Not the scrolling kind, the kind where you had to invent something to do, or simply sit with the silence. Where you rode your bike to someone's house and knocked on the door without ever knowing if they were home. You had a private inner life because there was no audience for it. No one was watching. No algorithm was learning your preferences. No digital record existed of the person you were at 13. That privacy was not nothing. It was the condition your nervous system grew up inside. And then it ended. Not gradually. The internet arrived, and within a few years, the world began expecting you to be available, visible, and self-presenting. All the time. You picked it up because you had to. You learned the platforms, the tools, the expectations. You became fluent in a language your childhood never taught you. But fluency is not the same as comfort. You can speak a language perfectly and still feel like a foreigner in it. Stop here for a moment, because this is where it gets harder than nostalgia. In 2008, many people born between 1976 and 1985 were in their late 20s and early 30s. Not children anymore, not yet settled. They were building. Careers, stability, a version of adult life they were told would arrive if they did everything right. And the financial collapse took the ground out from under that. Not as a distant news story, as a personal interruption, as rent that became impossible, jobs that disappeared, plans that had to be quietly abandoned. When financial disruption hits early adulthood, it can train the body to stay watchful for years. It can make stability feel temporary, even after life looks normal again. That wound did not close just because the economy eventually recovered. It went quiet. But quiet is not healed. It shows up in the way you check your bank account more often than you need to. In the way a good month still feels temporary. In the small flinch when someone says the economy is doing fine now, as if that erases the years it was not. You learned that stability can be taken mid-sentence, and your body never fully unlearned that lesson. And so you kept adapting, because that is what you had always done. You translated between your analog instincts and the digital world's demands. You translated between the stability your childhood promised and the instability your adult life delivered. You became the person in every room who could understand the older generation's hesitation and the younger generation's fluency. You became the bridge, and no one asked if bridges get tired. Consider what that translation actually looked like day after day. You write a message and pause before sending because part of you still treats written words like something permanent. You sit through a meeting and already know 3 people are not saying what they actually mean, and you say nothing. You open your phone in the morning and feel the weight of it before you have even read anything. Not anxiety exactly, more like a nervous system that never fully believed this pace was natural, but kept up with it anyway. And then you visit your parents, and you translate in the other direction. You set up their phone. You explain why the update changed everything again. You hold your frustration because you know they feel the same confusion you once did, just 20 years later. You are patient with them in a way no one was patient with you. This is the fatigue of constant adaptation. The cost of continuously updating your operating system without ever being allowed to reboot. You were not born tired. You were made tired by a specific historical demand no other generation faced in quite the same shape. Gen X had an analog life and largely stayed analog. Younger millennials and Gen Z were born into the digital world and built their identity inside it. You were handed a childhood that taught you one way of being human, and then handed an adulthood that required a completely different one. You did not fail to adapt. You adapted so completely that people stopped noticing it was hard. And that invisibility has its own weight. You were not outdated. You were not simply nostalgic. You were not a person who could not keep up. You were someone who kept up across two completely different versions of the world, and carried the emotional memory of both. The person who still notices when someone looks lonely in a crowded room, even while checking their notifications. The person who knows how to wait and how to scroll, and quietly hates that they have to do both. The person who learned digital fluency with their hands and analog slowness still living somewhere in their chest. What looked like being hard to categorize was actually something rarer. You were the translation layer between an era that knew how to be still and an era that never stopped moving. And translation is invisible labor. It always has been. There is a folded note somewhere in your memory, passed in a classroom before anything could be saved or screenshotted or sent to 100 people at once. And there is a phone on your desk right now, full of things waiting for your attention. Both of those things are yours. Both of those worlds live in you. And maybe that is why the exhaustion feels different from everyone else's. You are not just tired. You are tired in two languages. And that is not weakness. That is what it looks like to carry two eras in one nervous system, without ever being told that was what you were doing. If any part of this felt familiar, you are not the only one carrying it quietly. Leave a thought below, not for the algorithm, but for the next person who needs to know they are not imagining it.